you're not going to believe this. I haven't posted a video in a few weeks because I have a serious plot twist for you, not just for you, but for myself too. I have been operating on a belief for the past 4 years that my diagnosis was bipolar 2, but all of that has changed and it's completely pulled the rug out from underneath of me. And I feel like I'm back to where I was in the beginning of my bipolar 2 diagnosis, where I'm reanalyzing everything I've done, my decisions, the life that I've lived up until this point, and it's been a few confusing weeks trying to figure it out. I'm sure this has happened to other people and that I'm not alone in this, so let me just get right into it. So I've talked about this on my channel, but in 2021 I was diagnosed with bipolar 2. Up until that point I had, depression, anxiety, CPTSD, I had those diagnoses. But I want to talk about something before I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 in 2021. So around like 2017, I was seeing a therapist, and I remember going into her office, and I had been reading about different mental health diagnoses, and I've always been interested in psychology. I've always been interested in mental health. It's always felt like a puzzle that I've been trying to figure out. And I mentioned the potential of borderline personality disorder to her. And her immediate reaction was, "You don't have that. Because if you had that, you would be an extremely difficult client. And I don't work with clients who have borderline personality." So I felt dismissed, but I was like, okay, maybe she's right. Maybe I don't have it. Maybe I would be difficult. And there was never a conversation about it after that. So when I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, the reason that led to my diagnosis was I was being extremely impulsive. I was participating in self-damaging behaviors. I was on a lot of dating apps and being a little bit reckless with those dating apps. You could probably fill in the blanks there. When I didn't have my daughter because she was with her dad, sometimes I would drink myself to sleep. And I was just engaging in all these terrible behaviors because I felt empty and I didn't know how to fill my time. I just felt really alone and I wanted to kind of numb what I was going through. So when I mentioned, the dating apps and the impulsivity, and I had been spending money and all of that, my therapist at the time figured, okay, it's bipolar 2 disorder. So fast forward, I've carried that bipolar 2 diagnosis with me, and I have tried to look back at different episodes in my life, what seemed like episodes, and with bipolar 2, you don't have to have full-blown mania for 2 weeks, right? So because with bipolar 2, the hypomania only has to last for 4 days, I assumed that when I was being impulsive, it did last for around that time. And I wrote it off as bipolar 2. And I have had some severe episodes of depression to the point where I have been so extremely suicidal. And I mentioned in one of my last videos, I mentioned that I have struggled with suicidal thoughts my entire life, which now I know is one of the hallmarks of borderline personality disorder. So fast forward to today, I've started seeing a recent therapist. I changed jobs and states, and the one that I was seeing wasn't licensed in the state that I moved to, so I had to get a new therapist, and I've been seeing her for a couple months now, and I have been brutally honest with her, which is easier to do with some therapists than it is with others, just because of like personality types and different things like that. But with her, I have been so incredibly honest. And 2 sessions ago, she asked me if I had ever heard of borderline. And I was like, well, yeah, I've heard of it. And I told her, I was like, that's what I originally thought I had years ago, but my therapist said I'm not difficult, and borderline patients are difficult. And so because I'm not difficult, I don't have it. And she's like, well, typically they are known for being difficult. A lot of times, if that is their diagnosis, the therapist will sometimes not even tell the patient that that's their diagnosis because they get really defensive and they do the splitting. So sometimes they don't show up for appointments, or if they don't like what the therapist says, they'll get upset and they'll just stop coming. But she said because I've been in therapy my entire life, because I'm interested in mental health, because I have self-awareness that not a lot of other people have, it can be masked, or it can be a milder form, or even though I don't hit all of the criteria for borderline, that I most certainly can have borderline traits. And something we're exploring now is, I don't know if I have both. I don't know if I have bipolar and borderline. We're still trying to explore that. She's leaning more towards borderline. And honestly, it's been a really confusing time for me. And part of me is like, I can't have everything, right? There's no way that I have like 6 different diagnoses. Like, one of them has to be the main one. One of them has to be the primary source of like all of this. And so it has just been a whirlwind. I did take a personality inventory called PID 5SF, and in exploring my results, I do have strong traits when it comes to the emotional instability and the reactiveness. And like, I think I don't know much about it, but there's some factors that I most certainly have that could translate to borderline. But the problem with me is that I don't fit the standard or common profile of someone who would take that assessment that does have borderline. So I'm not fitting the expected profile. Again, that goes back to my self-awareness. And again, like, I've been interested in mental health my entire life. So being aware of mental health, I've been able to analyze the things that I've done, analyze the things I've done wrong, and tell myself, like, I don't want to be that person and I don't want to do that again. But have I been manipulative in the past? Absolutely. Have I been selfish? Absolutely. I mean, I look back to my early 20s and I was destructive. And so she recommended this book, and it's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And when I first started listening to it, I started bawling because it has described me to a T. I mean, it talks about being a walking paradox and how inconsistency is another hallmark of borderline, because one day they can be loving and supportive and compassionate, and then the next day they can be extremely cold. And I do experience that. It's talked about suicide ideation and struggling with that and making a lot of threats. And that's where my brain goes. When I'm having a hard time regulating myself, my first instinct is to go towards thoughts like that. So that's another thing. What else has it talked about? Being engaged in tumultuous relationships. That's something I struggled with my entire 20s. I mean, I was in toxic relationships back to back to back, and I was a part of the problem, and I recognized that I was a part of the problem. Thankfully, I'm in a very healthy relationship, and my husband is everything I've needed. And actually, my therapist went through this framework on how he can respond to me when I'm having moments, and he responds by the books. I mean, almost perfectly, and he naturally does that. So I think in a lot of ways he's been healing me. But other things that the book has talked about is changing jobs frequently. I have changed so many jobs. I've abandoned jobs when I was doing well just because I got bored. And it's because you have this chronic sense of emptiness and this void that you feel like you need to fill. And it has been productive in my career. I've worked my way up really quickly, but it's also been a downfall because, you know, I think I've missed opportunities and I've burned bridges that I didn't mean to burn or intend to burn, but I was just looking for something, looking for the next itch, and I have a very difficult time being content. I've also unfortunately destroyed a lot of my relationships because of my rage. I have had very disproportionate reactions to situations, and that's another thing of borderline. And I have a lot of guilt and shame about that. But it's ultimately, I've lost a lot of people along the way. So all of that, I've just kind of been thinking about. I will say, if I do have both, it's really an unfortunate combination. But I think at least knowing that I have borderline traits is going to help me move in the right direction, because now in my mind, when I start having mood changes, I'm thinking like, am I splitting right now? Which splitting is a common thing in people with borderline. So they either idolize people or they demoralize them. And I've even done that at work. Like, I've respected people, and then when they've disappointed me or, done something that I didn't agree with, I think that they're a terrible person. And I'm like, I can't work with them because this is the type of person they are. And it has been very hard in the past for me to see the gray area. I mean, it's very black and white, and that's another thing. So I think I do have traits. I think it's made a lot of sense. I think this book that I've been listening to and reading, it's resonating so deeply. I mean, so deeply. It's been a whirlwind, like I said. So that's why I haven't posted a lot. I feel like a fraud. I feel like I've talked about bipolar disorder and now I don't even know for a fact that's what it is. So I just feel like I've lied on this channel, and I know that's not the case. I know I haven't lied, and I know I've operated under one belief, and that's what I've been diagnosed with. So I thought that's what it was. But I think this just goes to show how, there's a lot of people who get misdiagnosed, and it takes them years to end up with the correct diagnosis. So I think this is just a testament to how difficult it is dealing with these things, and how mental illness is such a gray area, and we don't have blood tests that you can take to figure out the answers. And sometimes it's confusing. And this is when I would say, and I always preach this, we should be treating the symptoms and not the diagnosis, because each of us have a unique profile. Just like I don't fit the standard profile of borderline, I probably don't fit the standard profile of bipolar 2 either. So because of that, I need to focus on the things that I'm struggling with and the symptoms that I'm struggling with versus putting myself in this box. I'm glad that I can share this with you. It took me a couple weeks to even be able to talk about it because borderline is such a scary diagnosis. I don't know why it feels scarier than bipolar, but it does. When people hear borderline personality, they think there's not a lot of understanding about it, and they think that you have like DID or something. They think that you have a serious personality disorder, and it's just not the case. So it's been very scary for me to say it, but I've come to accept that I may have the traits, and I'm working with my therapist. We're doing some DBT. We're also doing some trauma work, and I'm confident. She's also got me working through this workbook, so I'm confident that we are headed in the right direction, and that's all that matters, regardless of what diagnosis I have. But if you've struggled with finding out your right diagnosis, I do encourage you to speak up. I mean, if I had been diagnosed with this when I was 19 and 20, when I first mentioned this to my therapist, maybe I could have grabbed a hold of my reaction sooner, and I wouldn't have blown my relationships up. And maybe I could have recognized in those moments that I was splitting, and I could have stopped the train from wrecking before it wrecked. So I have some regret that I didn't push more with other therapists after that. I'm curious if other people on my channel have experienced this, if you've gotten both of these diagnoses, if you've gotten one or the other, if you don't fully resonate with the one that you have now. Have you spoken up about it? Have you said anything? And yeah, I just encourage all of us to just lean on each other as we try to figure it out. But as always, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and until next time.